Long stretches of open road, dark skies, and engines pushing past every reasonable limit. That is the world Kamikaze Chris was born into, not because anyone handed it to him, but because he clawed his way there from nothing. His real name is Chris Day, and he grew up in Oklahoma City in a household where money was always scarce. The clothes on his back were already worn out before they reached him. Hammer-downs, tight budgets, and a father's heating and air business on weekends, that was his world. But instead of shrinking under that pressure, he turned it into fuel. What drove him was never really about cars. It was about competition. He has said it himself, he would race a shopping cart if the stakes were right. From BMX bikes to dirt bikes to full-blown street racing machines, the vehicle never mattered as much as the hunger behind the wheel. And that hunger led him straight into a brotherhood that would change his life forever. Because the people he met along the way were not just friends. They were the foundation of everything that came next. Among those friends were Justin Shearer, known as Big Chief, and Tyler Pretty, known as Flip. These were not casual racing buddies. Chris and Big Chief spent years side by side in driveways until 3 and 4 in the morning, building cars from scratch, including Big Chief's early Pontiac Le Mans known as the Crow. That dedication existed long before any television camera ever showed up. And it was real in a way that audiences would later sense through the screen. But what most people watching never fully understood was the grief already buried inside one of those cars, and the man it was built for. When Street Outlaws premiered on Discovery Channel on June 10, 2013, Chris was already a fixture in a world that had existed for years without an audience. The show followed a group of Oklahoma City street racers competing for spots on a top 10 list of the fastest cars in the region. The racing was real. The rivalries were real. Television just gave it a national stage. For Chris, it also gave his nickname a new weight. Kamikaze, earned through years of driving at the outermost edge of control, suddenly meant something far beyond the local strip. He has described his approach behind the wheel as living in what he called the jackass range. That razor-thin space where most people would lift off the throttle and breathe. Where he somehow found clarity. It was not that he wanted danger. In a strange way, danger was where the noise disappeared. And that mindset made him uniquely suited for a machine that was about to enter his life. A machine carrying history, tragedy, and the shadow of a man who never got to see its full potential. What was inside that car is something you need to hear, because it changes everything. Tyler Pretty was born in Chickasha, Oklahoma, and was a founding member of the 405 Street Racing Brotherhood long before Street Outlaws existed. He, Big Chief, and Chris had grown up in the same orbit, chasing the same obsession. Flip drove a 1980 Chevrolet El Camino, the ELCO, a car that barely held together, assembled from discarded parts and running on nitrous. It should have been slower than it was. It never was. The car reflected Flip's personality exactly. Unconventional, unpredictable, and consistently more dangerous than it appeared. Then in 2013, Tyler Pretty died at home at the age of 31. The circumstances were never publicly disclosed. His family asked for privacy, and none was given an official explanation. The shock moved through the 405 community like a wave. And when the car became available, Big Chief offered it to Chris. He bought it immediately. That was not a business decision. That was loyalty in the form of a purchase. From that moment forward, every modification Chris made to the ELCO carried the weight of a tribute. He spent years and his own savings transforming that car from a patched-together relic into something capable of competing at the highest level. By December 2017, it debuted twin-precision turbo 94mm Gen 2 Pro mod units producing approximately 3,500 horsepower. The investment was staggering for a man without sponsors, without a trust fund, without anything except savings from heating and airwork and an unshakable sense of purpose. He has said explicitly that the car represented everything he had in his whole life. That was not exaggeration for the cameras. That was the truth. And then, one night in 2020, he almost didn't even plan to race. The crash happened during filming. The episode aired in February 2021, but the night it happened hit long before that. Chris lost control of the ELCO, the car left the roadway, and the damage was catastrophic. The body, gone. The chassis, gone. The engine, destroyed. The turbochargers, gone. Everything that had been built, rebuilt, bled over, and paid for across years of sacrifice was eliminated in a single moment. Standing in the wreckage, he described the car as everything he had in his whole life. The footage became one of the most discussed moments in Street Outlaws history, not because of the crash itself, but because of the man standing next to what remained. The financial damage was brutal. There was no sponsor safety net, no rebuild fund waiting quietly in the background. What he had was gone, and what came next had to be built from almost nothing. But here is what happened instead of collapse. He reached out. He auctioned off a Weld racing wheel, a Mickey Thompson tire, and a TBM brake rotor sheared from the car in the crash, each signed, through an eBay listing that climbed past $10,000 within days and drew over 100 bids. He offered to cook a steak dinner in his racing suit for whoever pushed it past $25,000. The humor was genuine. So was the desperation underneath it. By February 2021, he announced a path forward, a black C5 Corvette, built using what survived from the Elco's drivetrain. Same flat black look. Same underdog energy wrapped in different sheet metal. But the thing about the ELCO that could never be transferred to another car, the thing nobody talks about enough, was not the horsepower. It was what the car carried. The loss of the ELCO forced a reckoning that no new chassis could solve, because what disappeared in that crash was not a vehicle. It was the most tangible form of a friendship that could never come back. And the deeper you look at what came after, the more it reveals about who Chris Day really is. The crash made public what Chris had always been candid about privately. The financial foundation of his racing was always precarious. He has spoken openly about periods during the show when he was, in his own words, dirt broke poor. Street Outlaws never made all of its cast members wealthy. The exposure was real. The income from appearances and merchandise helped. But the cost of keeping a competitive race car on the strip at the level the show demanded consistently outpaced those returns for drivers without corporate backing. Chris ran on savings, labor, and the loyalty of a small group of people who believed in what he was building. The ELCO crash stripped away years of that investment in a single evening. The C5 Corvette build stretched across months and then years, longer than a well-funded operation would have taken. Updates came through social media. Fans followed every stage. And something interesting happened in that extended silence. The audience did not leave. Fan communities tracked the rebuild. His following stayed engaged across years of progress reports, responding with the kind of attention most television personalities only receive during active broadcasts. That loyalty was not built by a character. It was built by a real person who had been visibly vulnerable in a way that felt honest, because it was. What people recognized when they watched him stand next to the wreckage of the ELCO was not television drama. They recognized grief. Real grief. The kind that comes from spending years rebuilding a dead friend's car from nothing, pouring every dollar you can spare into honoring someone who can no longer race beside you, and then watching it disappear in a single night on camera. No producer scripted that. No rating strategy manufactured that moment. It was a man processing a real loss in real time, and racing fans, who are generally skeptical of everything reality television produces, saw through it immediately and recognized it as the truth. That quality, the transparency about cost and sacrifice, is what separates Kamikaze Chris from most of the personalities street racing television has produced. His story is not aspirational in the easy sense. Nobody watches it and thinks it sounds simple. They watch it and recognize what it actually costs to put everything into something that might not pay off, and to do it anyway, because not trying is the only thing that would feel worse. Whether the Corvette ever produces the results the ELCO reached at its peak matters less than it might seem to. Chris has already shown through the length and difficulty of the rebuild that the motivation was never purely about winning. If it were, he would have walked away from a car with stock front suspension and a 62.5-inch driveshaft long before 2020. He stayed because the car represented something beyond its race results. And when it was gone, he started building the next thing for the same reason. The car is gone. The work continues. And the reason he lost it all turns out to be exactly the same reason he keeps going.